Hi, Pastor Steve Talmage with Love of Christ Lutheran Church in Mesa, Arizona. Each week, Pastor Nanette Christofferson or I provide 2 introductory videos for upcoming Bible readings. We're going to look at our Old Testament first lesson for Sunday, March 3rd, 2024, Exodus 20, 1-17. This is the giving of the 10 Commandments. You might recall in the season of Lent and these Old Testament readings, we're going to be looking at the various covenants that God has made with the people of God. And in this case, we're going to look at the covenant made with Moses and the people of Israel. So, the context leading into chapter 20. Israelites have been freed from slavery in Egypt. They have now reached Mount Sinai. So they've crossed the Red Sea. They have made their way to the high place in the Sinai Peninsula, and their revelation is going to come, direction is going to come, the covenant with God is going to be made. We hear these verses or hear these words in 19:5-6. Now then, if you indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among all the peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So remember, these folks have just come out of bondage. They've come out of slavery under the most powerful empire in that part of the world. And now they're being declared who they really are as God's chosen people and the purpose that God has for them. So, a reflection question to start off as you think about hitting Mount Sinai, being liberated from generations of slavery and bondage and horrific living conditions. How might understanding and remembering what God has first done for us and God's claim on our lives have an impact on how we live out our lives? This is a theme or a question that runs throughout the whole Old Testament and even into the New Testament, where because of sin, Genesis 3, we turn inwards and we always think about what we've done and what we deserve and what we've earned. But the invitation from Genesis really through Revelation is remember what God has done from the very beginning to the present. And what does it mean to know that God has placed a claim on your life? What kind of impact might that have as you look at who you are and how God values you and the role and purpose that God has for all of us as those who are loved by God? We see there's a continuing of the promise made way back to Abraham. God seeks to make it clear that this covenant makes them God's possession or special treasure. It makes them a kingdom whose citizens are all priests with access to God, and that they are a holy nation separated from all other nations, called to serve and minister on behalf of God for the sake of the world. So this chosenness, this binding of God to a particular people is for the sake of the world and not just for the sake of the people chosen. So we go back to Genesis 12. Blessed to be a blessing. The common question when we get to 10 Commandments is, pending on the traditions in which you may have been exposed, is there different orders of the 10 Commandments. So, I'm going to explain that. The Jewish people regard I am the Lord your God as the first commandment, and verses 3-6 of chapter 20 as the second commandment. Roman Catholics group verses 3-6 as the first commandment, but then divide verse 17 into 2 commandments. Most Protestants consider verse 3, you shall have no other gods before me, as the first commandment, verses 4-6, the second commandment, and verse 17, the 10th. So there's a little variation between Jews, Roman Catholics, and most Protestants, but of course, Lutherans coming out of the Catholic tradition follow the Catholic ordering of the commandments. So let's get into them. Then God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. So God identifies what God has already done and who God is. God is the God of liberation. God is the one who delivered them, brought them out of the land of Egypt and the house of slavery. And this is a critical memory that they need to hold on to. Because as we get to the time of Jesus, there are people who have forgotten when they say, we're no one's slaves. We're sons of Abraham. And they forgot that the descendants of Abraham were slaves in Egypt under Pharaoh. And then verse 3, you shall have no other gods before me. So here we are right at the beginning. Before the people are going to get to be able to move into the promised land, God's laying it all out, what the expectations are, what the binding agreement is, and they're to have no other gods. And if you read through the rest of the Old Testament, what's going to be the biggest test, trouble, and problem for the people of Israel? Chasing after other gods. 4-6, you shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that's in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who reject me, but showing steadfast love to the 1000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. So, again, ancient Near East religion had idols. They would carve things in stone and in wood, and they would be images out of nature or images out of their imagination, and they would bow down to these images, and they would worship them and offer sacrifices to them. And we get an interesting comment and maybe a troubling word here in verse 5. I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents. We need to again understand that our understanding of who God really is revealed through the person of Jesus Christ. But we're looking at 1400 years before Jesus is on the scene. And we're looking at people who are evolving into an understanding of one God, the worship of one God, Yahweh. And there are all sorts of pagan practices that are surrounding them. And they're influenced by all those pagan practices, both in Egypt and as they will travel through other people groups. And I think we have this kind of contrast of there are consequences. If you're going to bow down and chase after idols, people are going to suffer. Your children are going to suffer. Your grandchildren and great-grandchildren are going to suffer. They're going to miss out on the blessing. They're going to miss out on the gifts that I have for them. They're going to miss out on the opportunity to be used to be a blessing to the world. And that's going to go for 3 or 4 generations because you chase after other gods. But look at verse 6. But showing steadfast love to the 1000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. Look at that exponential extension of steadfast love to the 1000th generation. Punishment goes 3 or 4 generations. God's steadfast love is going to go 1000 generations. And as I read this, I think the main point is God is serious about trusting him and worshiping him, but also believing that God wants to bless us to be a blessing so that all might know who God is. Verse 7, you shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. This is not using the Lord's name in vain by swearing or profanity. And again, that gets thrown in people's faces. This is when we start pointing our finger and saying, well, that's God's will, when we know it's not God's will. And how many preachers and others have said horrible things that, well, God is judging this city for their sinfulness. Or God is judging this people group because of the color of their skin, or because of their lifestyle, or because of this or that, or their religion. That's using God's name in vain when we dare to claim what the will of God is. And when we look at the New Testament, the ultimate will of God is that no one will be lost, and all will be saved, and all will know that they're precious children, beloved of God. So here, Moses is speaking for God to make sure that the people of God understand when you speak and use the Lord's name, you better be careful. And the Jews took it so seriously, they would never use the proper name of God when they would read their scriptures. 8, the Sabbath day. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Again, we have lived in a major shift from how an agrarian lifestyle and the rhythms of nature would allow people to have these kind of rest and work periods. Just the lack of electricity, the lack of light. But now we're 24/7 on all the time. We can work every second of every breath that we have until we collapse. So what do we do with this when there's no restrictions on how much we work, how much we play, at the expense of nurturing a relationship with God? So, how do you make observing the Sabbath a priority when everything is open, accessible, and even scheduled on Sundays? Look at your children's and grandchildren's schedules. Look at your own schedule. How has the Christian community been a source of demand and busyness, preventing the opportunity for rest and reflection? We struggle here at Love of Christ because we try to jam so much onto a Sunday morning because we got to capture people while they're here. Because we may not ever get them back. You know, you got to maximize all this time together, and it's generally on a Sunday. The gift and purpose of Sabbath. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work. You, your son and your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that's in them, but rested the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. If it's good enough for God, we're invited to do what God does. And that's allow moments of rest and renewal and worship and reflection, that we don't just go. Verse 12, honor your father and your mother so that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. What does that mean to honor your parents? We go from worshiping God, honoring our parents and family is essential, and now we're going to extend out into community. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal. What fractures community is when people don't trust their neighbors, and they look and believe that their neighbors are out to take from them. Maybe their life, maybe their wife or their husband, or maybe their possessions. 16, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. How might this commandment apply to the barrage of social media posts, many of them not even close to being true? How might this commandment apply to the debate around First Amendment free speech and how an individual's right to say or post whatever one wants take precedence to what is factually true, while also considering common decency and good? Boy, we struggle with that. Social media has really opened our eyes to this commandment and how easy it is for us to bear false witness against our neighbor, and often without any kind of accountability. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or male or female slave or ox or donkey or anything that belongs to your neighbor. How many precious resources of time, ability, and money are wasted on trying to keep up with the Joneses, or be in a position where others see you as one of the Joneses? As we conclude, as you look at the commandments, are the commandments a gift or a burden? I want to believe that God's intention is for them to be a gift. God bless. Take care.